Matters shows for free a week. But if you want to support the channel, there are a few ways of doing it. Hit the like button on each live broadcast or video. This helps the channel grow. Hit the subscribe button and select the all notifications options. Hit the thanks button to buy a super sticker. You can do this on the live chat too. You can also join our Patreon page or buy us a coffee at the link in all of our video descriptions below. We are also looking for sponsors. If you want our latest advertising rates and how you can get involved, then email John at nufcmatters1892@gmail.com. Thanks for watching.
Critics attack. It feels like I've been talking to myself again. But it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past. I'm dwelling on the thoughts I cannot say to you. If I don't say the words, then maybe it's not true. And it feels alright when they come and say to you, you're the only thing that makes us all believe.
Welcome along to NUFC Matters. It is a 30-minute show, well 25 minutes now with Ben Jacobs. We just thought we'd get Ben on to have a quick chat with him about transfers, and I'm sure Ben will share this on his Twitter account as well. We are broadcasting on Twitter and on YouTube today. Technical problems at my end, I think, but Ben is perfect picture, so Ben looks great. Let's get into questions. Ben, I am going to give you a right reply. John is one of a few people who I notice have been posting in our comments, having a little bit pop at you. For what they see is maybe you being a bit more biased or stirring the pot, or trying to get Isak to move to Liverpool. You're not the only one who's getting this. Fabrizio Romano is also somebody who is getting a bit of stick, saying that you work for Liverpool, or it's one of these situations. Has Ben ever taken a payment from a Big Six club or an agent to post a story like Romano, or all his stories sourced? I think it's a polite way of asking the same question that lots of people are asking in the chat, mate. So, write a reply, Ben, is all yours.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. First of all, I mean, it's a ridiculous question. We come on these kind of fan podcasts in our own time to be accountable for our work. But the idea that anybody would facelessly accuse a journalist of a payment of that nature, not only is it farcically incorrect, but it's defamatory. And as journalists, all we're trying to do is report in the most balanced way possible. And guess what? If you have a player that you want to keep at your club and that player might leave, you're probably not going to like our coverage. And similarly, if the messaging out there is Isak's going to stay, you're going to love the coverage and say that the journalist has reported in a brilliant way. And this is just one of those sagas that, of course, has a lot of emotion. He's Newcastle's best player. So all indications that he might leave are not going to go down well. But the idea that as journalists, we're taking sides, or we're not trying to present things in a balanced way, or we're in with a club in any capacity, is utterly ridiculous. And you wouldn't be a journalist if you ever decided to go down that route, nor do I ever know of anybody or any club that would ever have suggested that, because that's just not what journalism is. And I think, as you say, we've got a lot of abuse throughout the summer. Me, David Ornstein, and Fabrizio Romano. And I think that people need to understand that when you just assume something and then pile on abuse instead of maybe reading the work or listening to the people, you probably actually will be taking an aspect of our reporting, maybe that you've seen out of context on social media, without understanding the true picture. So if we sort of come back to Isak and why it skews more perhaps towards Liverpool, and why Newcastle fans are so angry, it's not just because Alexander Isak might leave. It's because actually the Newcastle United position has changed repeatedly, and the Liverpool position has been relatively silent. Now, I'm not for any way saying that Liverpool are silent privately, or that Liverpool have been silent because, of course, at some point they've had to make contact with both Newcastle and Alexander Isak. But let's not forget the chronology is as follows. First of all, when Alexander Isak was not given a new contract by Paul Mitchell, he decided he wanted to leave the club. Then in April, before Newcastle even had Champions League football, he again told Newcastle United, not Liverpool at that point, that he wanted to leave the football club. And then since then, we've gone through this sort of back and forth. And in that interim, in March, for example, when I said Alexander Isak could leave and it will be a whole summer saga, it got shot down. Hurls of abuse happened, and that's proven to be correct. And then again, if you look at the Newcastle United side, the challenge I think they've had is a complete lack of consistency, which means they've made a lot of noise. And sources are certainly speaking to us. But when we try and reflect the Newcastle position, and there's no criticism on the club, the fan base, the player, because I've said many times, it's a wonderful football club. Love to see them succeed. It'd be great if they can keep hold of their best players and all of that. But the Newcastle United position has made it quite hard to report on, because they've gone from not for sale at any price and in a militant way that the fan base got behind, but that's not true. Then they issue a public statement saying there are actually conditions of a sale, but they've not been met. That's different to not for sale. We've heard 150 million, but my understanding is that's never been quoted to Liverpool. Then it's 130 million. Then it's back to not for sale. Then it's the ownership have flown in and maybe he'll sign a new deal. Then it goes back to he doesn't want to sign a new deal. Then we've had he's not playing against Celtic in pre-season because he's got a thigh injury. That may be true. We have to respect that position because we know he went for a scan, but the scan came back clear. Then we've had everything's rosy. He's not training alone, but actually he is training alone, but he's not training at all, but he's training in Sweden, but he's off to a pre-season tour in Asia and so on. And that's what I mean by noise, not that Liverpool, Newcastle have any tactics here at play, but all the sort of briefings, all of the public statements, all of the push, all of the counter push, it's all either Isak or Newcastle. And the Newcastle position has changed repeatedly. Let's not forget, they've also said that 2 replacements and they'll sell him. Hugo Ekitike, and they would have sold him. Maybe now 1 replacement and they'll sell him. And I don't, again, point that out because I'm saying that Newcastle are right or wrong. It's just in short, Newcastle's position has changed consistently, and we have to reflect that, which is why if you look back at the last 6 months, you have all these different things, and none of that's from Liverpool. And Liverpool's position, because they're the buyer, has been quite consistent, that they want him, that they don't plan on paying 150 million, and that they're going to back off until right towards the end of the window to see if they get any encouragement or a pathway to a deal. And that is the sort of lay of the land. And I think when people take a small aspect of that, they just hear Newcastle are making noise, Liverpool are not. Newcastle have created a problem, Liverpool haven't. Liverpool are going to get him at their price, Newcastle aren't. And that's not really what we're reporting. What we're saying is that Liverpool's tactic is clear. They always wanted Ekitike and Isak. They're still hoping to get Isak. They don't want to pay 150 million. And since their last bid, they've backed off. At the same time, Newcastle and Isak have both issued statements, and all manner of other changes of position have happened between the months of March and now. And that's why it's kind of become a summer saga. And we have to wait and see how it plays out. But I think this idea that people glibly throw at a journalist, you're on one side or you're on the books of a club, it's libelous, it's defamatory, and it's simply not true. We wouldn't be journalists if we considered that type of deal. And I'm not even aware of any football club in the world that would want a journalist or would approach a journalist, because they would know that we would say no and most likely expose them, because it would be a bigger story if anyone ever came to me and said, do you want a payment to cover X, Y, or Z on behalf of a club? The first thing I would do is expose that club, because it would be a ridiculous thing for them to try, and it would be immoral, and it would go against all of our training and practices as journalists. So whereas I understand the question, I think people have to be very careful what they accuse journalists of doing, because all we're trying to do is, to the best of our ability, report on a very complicated story.
Okay, and Jonathan, thank you for saying that, mate. So that is great. 7,500 watching. Those of you on Twitter, please jump onto YouTube, search NUFC Matters, hit the subscribe button. We do 7 shows a week. Okay, let's get into the other players. Tom Dixon says, Ben, what is the latest on Jorgen Strand Larsen, and what is the latest on Johan Wissa?
Yeah, I think these are two good examples again of where Newcastle have been a little bit inconsistent in their intel within the market. And I think some of that is down to the fact that there's no sporting director. You've got Yasser Al-Rumian flying in. You've got a bit of a handover from Paul Mitchell. Andy Howe is obviously leading the negotiations. So there's a few moving parts here. And perhaps when they first came in for Jorgen Strand Larsen, their intel was, we can get him because he wants the move. And then shortly after, they've realised that Wolves are going to make things a whole lot more difficult. And that's kind of where we're at the moment. So 2 bids are in. I'm not aware of a third bid at this point, but there were some suggestions in the last 24 hours that something around the 60 million mark might go in. I think Wolves have been quite firm in their position that they don't want to sell. I believe that position to be genuine, at least like Newcastle, unless they find a replacement. They haven't yet. The Olche deal, even though he's kind of like an attacking midfielder, is off for now. They are looking at other names. It's unclear whether that's a bit like Newcastle saying their strikers are Callum Wilson replacements. It's unclear whether that's to allow Hwang to leave and Crystal Palace are interested, or whether if they can find a number 9, that then Strand Larsen will be sanctioned and that will be a U-turn. But this is quite a difficult one, I sense, for Newcastle to get done. I don't think it's going to happen at 60 million. And we have to wait and see now whether they do place the third bid. Because when they place 2 bids in quick succession, 50 and 55, the feeling from the Newcastle side was the talks with Wolves were quite positive. And yet Wolves sources I spoke to were shooting it down and were saying there's basically no price that we're going to sell. So I think this will be the last day where Newcastle put time and energy and efforts on Jorgen Strand Larsen. And if they bid again, it's probably because they think that Wolves are going to cave. And if they don't bid in the next 24 hours, then my feeling is that Newcastle accept that it's over and will again have to move on to other targets. Johan Wissa is still waiting and hoping that there is an agreement. He's doing pretty much what Alexander Isak has done. He's not training with the group. He's not making himself available for selection. And Brentford are also looking for another number 9. So the Dango Ouattara arrival was not about Wissa replacement. He was the replacement for Brian Mbeumo, according to Brentford sources. And Brentford are still looking for somewhere close to 50 million. Newcastle's last bid was 40 million, 35 million up front, 5 million in add-ons. The 5 million in add-ons were difficult to reach. And as a result, Brentford only construed it as a 35 million pound deal. I think if Newcastle went 40 plus 5 or 45 plus 5, even if those 5 in add-ons were difficult, and it's quite a lot of money for a player who's 28, nearly 29, with 1 year left on his contract and a club option. But if they went to 40 plus 5 or 45 plus 5, I think at that point, Brentford may be prepared to entertain a sale. So that's one to watch right until the end of the window. And of course, there is a possibility, even though they're both being billed as Wilson replacements, that Newcastle do decide to try and add Wissa and Strand Larsen if they possibly can. And that may well have a late window bearing on the Alexander Isak situation.
Okay, I mean, there's lots of other players being mentioned. One that's coming up at the moment is Mainoo. Obviously, he's going to leave Manchester United by the looks of it. Also, Hoyland is another one that's been thrown into the mix. I mean, my question mark is: would Manchester United do business with Newcastle? And is there any interest from Newcastle, Ben, in either of those players? Do you think?
Well, Kobbie Mainoo, there's historical interest, so it can't be discounted. And of course, if they add another midfielder, there is also the possibility too of moving Joe Linton into the front line. If they only get one attacker, that's a possibility that I don't think should be entirely discounted. Mainoo's preference, I'm told, is to join a club with European, if not Champions League football. So that's a tick for Newcastle. The downside is that he may be more inclined to go abroad if he leaves rather than stay in the Premier League. And I think this will all now depend on Manchester United in the next 24, 48 hours, because player and club decided to have a conversation after the game last night against Grimsby. Not necessarily any urgency on Manchester United's part to sell right now. But if Mainoo turns around and says, I don't think I'm a fit in this system and I want to leave, he's got 2 years left on his deal, that's when you might find a deal some sources say in the region of 40 to 45 million might be possible. And it's a very good price, to be perfectly honest with you, because Kobbie Mainoo could become a real star and a fantastic player in the right system. It's just not necessarily working for him at the moment at Manchester United. And seemingly Ruben Amorim prefers other midfielders. And of course, Manchester United fans are split on this one, because some of them are saying if Mainoo just stays, he might outlast the manager at this rate and then become perfect for Manchester United Football Club. And I think that's genuinely going through Kobbie Mainoo's mind, not necessarily a wait out Ruben Amorim, but his love and attachment for Manchester United is still there. And he will back himself and feel that if he stays, eventually he'll get opportunities, whether under this manager or, of course, another in the future. But if someone's very bullish, and if somebody puts down that number of around 40, 45 million, I think if Mainoo wants to go, Manchester United will give it due consideration. So we can't discount Newcastle. But at this stage, I would say their interest, like Tottenham and Chelsea, is historical. You've got Napoli, who are also quite keen. And I would also keep an eye on Bayern Munich and even Bayer Leverkusen, because Erik ten Hag is there and he knows and really likes Kobbie Mainoo as well. So I think there'll be some options in Germany for Mainoo. Newcastle, I would say, don't get too excited yet, because the interest is historical. But if Manchester United indicate they're willing to sell at that kind of number, I do think that there will be Premier League suitors. And I don't think we can discount another midfield reinforcement for Newcastle either, because Sean Longstaff obviously left the club this summer.
Okay, DC, good morning. He just simply says Jackson with 2 question marks. I'm presuming he means Nicholas, not Michael. What's the situation with Nicholas? It looks as if a German move could be in the offing rather than moving to a Premier League club on this one, Ben.
Yeah, it's kind of Bayern working on that deal and then Chelsea hoping to get it resolved along with Christopher Nkunku, who's expected to go to Milan. And if those two go out the door, Chelsea can go and move and bring in Garnacho and Xavi Simons, basically. So if, as expected, they get this sort of number of 35 or 40 million euros, then I think Nicholas Jackson could be a loan, likely with an obligation. And that may open the door to suitors like Aston Villa and Newcastle to enter the race as well. I think Nico Jackson quite likes the idea of Bayern, but let's see whether Newcastle move. The challenge, I think, even though everyone will sort of put 2 and 2 together and make 4 and say if Strand Larsen's not possible and Wissa's difficult, why don't they pivot to Nico Jackson? And does that unlock the window? And again, have repercussions on Alexander Isak. But obviously the flip side is that if you've gone through all window going, we bid for Ekitike, we bid for Shesko, we try for João Pedro, and then you suddenly go Strand Larsen and Wissa, then from Jackson's point of view, he's seen a big list before him, and players naturally, especially if they're going to do a loan, and especially if that loan is maybe only a conditional obligation based on appearances. In other words, it starts as an option, becomes an obligation. They maybe turn around and go, this club want to try before they buy. Maybe they have no confidence that they're going to sign the player permanently. And as a consequence, they might pick another club. Whereas Bayern are going really big on Jackson. They're telling him he's going to get minutes and they're making him feel like they really want him now in this last part of the window. So I don't think that Jackson and Newcastle is definite, but Newcastle, Villa and Bayern are the 3 clubs for Nico Jackson at the moment. And I also wouldn't rule out, by the way, Lois Openda as well, another name that was discussed by Newcastle earlier in the window. Of course, they pivoted and instead went for Benjamin Sesko. He's another name that they've really liked throughout the window too. So you are going to see some movement. I think it'd be a big, big surprise if Newcastle don't add at least 1 attacker between now and the end of the window. And I also think it's worth noting that in a difficult summer with no sporting director and everything being about Alexander Isak, if you discount Isak, and I know it's hard to do because we're then putting that in a bubble and ignoring it, but if you look at what they've done in August, it feels to me like it's been quite a productive window. And of course, nobody would care that much about 2 strikers or even 1 Wilson replacement as much anyway, if Alexander Isak was just playing for Newcastle United. So I think Anthony Elanga and Jacob Ramsey are 2 very positive signings. And I think that Malik Chow is another one that has got a big future ahead of him. And Aaron Ramsey just feels like a no-brainer with the structure and the price that they got him for. So you add all of that up. And most Newcastle fans, if Alexander Isak had come out on June the 1st and said, I'm staying at Newcastle, I'm signing a new deal, and somehow we can go back in time and remove the Isak part from this summer, I think the rest of Newcastle's window only needs one more attacker, and everyone else that they've brought in so far, relatively positive. It's just the fact that it feels like they've started the season struggling for goals. Then you look at the Liverpool game and the makeshift striker in Anthony Gordon gets sent off. You can't bring Isak back in. Callum Wilson's gone. They drew 0-0 against Aston Villa. Add all of that up, and it just looks like they really need Alexander Isak. And if they're not going to get Alexander Isak back, they really need a prolific 10, 15 goals minimum in the Premier League a season goal scorer that's reliable, that's proven in that mould of Ekitike, or some would obviously say Benjamin Sesko as well. But discount Isak and look at all the other signings. And for me, it's still been a relatively good month of August for Newcastle in the market if you're looking at the incomings.
7 minutes left. Let's try and cram a few in. Ben, are Wolves or Brentford, I guess, linked with players coming in? It's Thursday. Is there time to get Strand over the line? But Sean's asking about that. Are Brentford and Wolves actively looking for players to bring in, which would, of course, help Newcastle bring in maybe Wissa and Larsen?
Yeah, I think Wolves hold an interest in the Genk striker, Tulu Arakade, who I'm told is going to be available for somewhere in the region of £20 million. And the Wolves' perspective is they were always looking for a second striker. So, like I said to you a moment ago, there could be a possibility that if the Nigerian comes in from Genk, then you have a possibility that what will happen is Hwang will maybe go to Crystal Palace instead. And I think if that's the case, then it will be a clear indication that Wolves just don't want to sell Strand Larsen. And it's not quite like Alexander Isak, because Isak is obviously pushing for a move. Wissa is pushing for a move. But what's not happening with Strand Larsen is he may want the Newcastle move. I think that's true, but he's not agitating for it. He played even in the EFL Cup. He came off the bench. He got a couple of goals. So that naturally allows Wolves to be quite calm about the situation. So I wouldn't get overexcited if Wolves sign another striker, because all signs are that they always wanted a second striker in the latter part of the window. But what I would say is I think if Newcastle are going to place another bid, if they feel like Wolves are going to bring someone in, they'll try their luck. And then we'll see whether that stance is rigid or whether potentially there's some sort of ability for Wolves to change their mind. I don't think it gets done at 60 million either. I think you're looking at 65 or 70 million as a minimum. And then for Brentford, Max Bayer is the one that they like. Doesn't look like the player wants to leave. So again, similar position. Brentford would rather keep Wissa. It's looking difficult. No progress made at the moment. I think if Newcastle bid again, one final offer. If that offer's not accepted, they'll walk away. They'll move on to other targets. So it feels like D-Day with Wissa. And I sense that Newcastle are running out of a little bit of patience on that one. So I don't see them making more than one bid. And I think if they do, it will be before deadline day and it will be take it or leave it.
Okay, we have got 13,000 watching live. Thank you very much for supporting us on NUFC Matters. Hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel, which is NUFC Matters. 5 minutes to go. And Ben, is there any substance to Bayer Leverkusen's interest in Botman?
Yeah, there is, and it's linked to Piero Hincapié, so that's an indication that Arsenal are at least making enough progress to make Leverkusen think they need a replacement, but it's a complete non-starter. Botman doesn't want to leave. Newcastle don't want to sell. So the inquiry is probably better news for Arsenal fans than Leverkusen ones, because it shows that Leverkusen are not immovable around a deal potentially lower than the release clause, which is 60 million euros for Hincapié. And Leverkusen wouldn't be scouring the market, especially not for a high-profile starting replacement like Botman, if they didn't think that Hincapié might go in the final days. So let's see if there's progress there. And then obviously if Leverkusen agree something, they probably want to line up a replacement too. But from what I'm told, Leverkusen called Newcastle. It was a very short conversation, and they were told in no uncertain terms that Newcastle are not going to entertain any kind of sale, nor did they get any encouragement from the player side. So although the story has substance, it's a total non-starter.
Okay, Ben, you've got 3 minutes left. What happens with Isak then, in your opinion? Does he stay? Does he go? And if he stays, is there room for being reintegrated? Do you think he would be happy to do that, or do you think that ship sailed now? What's your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said right at the top, and that's why I stress it. It's no criticism to Isak or Newcastle, but throughout this whole saga, we've had Isak's happy, Isak's well compensated, Isak doesn't want to leave, Isak's not for sale, Isak does want to leave, Isak's forcing a move, Isak doesn't ever want to play for the football club again, even if the window shuts. Isak might sign a new deal. Wait, no, he won't. Isak needs to be told by Liverpool the move is off before considering reintegration. And I think that last point is probably true. It's a World Cup year. If nothing happens, you would think they would have to find a solution, because the last thing he'll want is just to sit on the sidelines until January at the earliest. And then obviously the Newcastle position has been not for sale quite fiercely, not for sale at any price, won't entertain offers, rejecting an offer. Conditions of a sale haven't been met, not for sale again, 150, 130. 110 was a low ball offer, according to Newcastle sources. And now we're at the end of the window, the end of the saga. And not all of these things on the Isak side or the Newcastle side can be true. And similarly, on the Liverpool side, we're going to have to work out whether their position, which is we're not really going to go above 120, is also true. And that's another thing to look out for, because, of course, if a deal gets done at 110, 120, then Liverpool's position has been consistent throughout. And suddenly 110 doesn't look a very low offer if they then get it done at 120. Because if you think of virtually every deal this summer, including some Newcastle bids, the first bid and the last bid start 10, 15, 20 million apart. That's just normal negotiating. So if it got done at 120, Liverpool's tactic has been stay silent after the first bid, let it become untenable between Newcastle and Isak, bid around 120, get the player, and then all of the noise and all the other aspects of the deal will kind of be exactly that, just a saga that's played out in public, and Newcastle have ended up getting the player late on their terms and their price. But obviously, if Liverpool come back in and they bid 150, then you have to lean towards Newcastle were right about the price all along. Newcastle were right to reject 110. Newcastle were right to let it drag on this late. And then maybe they get a massive amount of money and can say it was always our asking price. And that's the thing. We won't know the true context of exactly what was put out there and spun versus correct until we understand, if he goes, what the final price is. And I sense at the moment that if he goes, it will be much lower than 150. Otherwise, he won't go at all. And maybe even Liverpool won't bid at all. So does he go? I think the fact Liverpool are not looking at other targets, the fact that it's become untenable at the moment between Newcastle and Alexander Isak, would suggest that Liverpool are still active and still trying. But we'll have to wait and see. It's not me dodging the question. I just think anyone telling you right now, is he going to go or is he going to stay, is basically guessing in a 50-50, highly political, difficult saga where both sides are kind of waiting for each other at this point. Liverpool are waiting for encouragement, and Newcastle don't want to give any encouragement unless they get attackers in and get a higher price. And it's been a stalemate for 3 weeks, but I don't think it can just remain like this. So we'll have to see now whether there's a genuine pathway to a deal, which in Liverpool's eyes is still at 120, and in Newcastle's eyes might be as high as 150, but it's not a number that they've ever directly quoted to Liverpool, which I think suggests the price might be a little bit lower. And that's where we stand at the moment. Isak obviously wants the move. Liverpool haven't given up yet, but there has to be that pathway to the deal. And again, I stress, Liverpool sources are clear that if the pathway to a deal is at 150, they won't be bidding at all. If the pathway to a deal is around 120, they will be bidding. And if they bid, even if it's sort of turned down first, negotiated, whatever, if they bid again, I think it happens. And I think that's the sort of clue in all of this. If they place another bid, I don't think it will be out of tactics, optics, desperation, blind, trying their luck. I think Liverpool's position is basically, if we bid, it's because Newcastle tell us this is happening. And if we don't bid at all, there was never a pathway to a deal. So that's the thing that Liverpool are waiting on. And in many ways, the ball is in Newcastle's court.
We're going to end up with Jamie Vardy, I think, Ben.
Good signing. I would take him.
I knew you would say that, Ben. We've had enough of your time. Thank you very much. 14,500, mate. You do pull the numbers in. Always great to have you on, mate. And hopefully get you on next week, maybe just before or just after the transfer window closes. Take care, Ben.
Look forward to it. All the best, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thanks to Ben. I am back tonight with Super Mac, Malcolm MacDonald, and John Gibson from the Evening Chronicle. Look forward to seeing you all then. Take care. Bye-bye. A big thanks to all our sponsors, Skips and Bins. You can find them at their website, skipsandbins.com. Contact them at www.skipsandbins.com/contact. Say hello to low-cost waste disposal with pay-as-you-go and contract waste management. A big thanks to Mr. Vicky's Sauces, handmade in Cumbria. You can find them at their website, mrvickies.co.uk, email info@mrvickies.co.uk, or telephone 01768 210 102. Thanks to our fanzine sponsor, United Group Travel. There are no strangers on our tours, just friends you haven't met yet. 2 crew driver and courier, local family company, 3-star plus quality hotels and no interchanges. Hot and cold snacks and drinks available on the coach, all excursions included. Their website, unitedgrouptravel.com, email beverly.ugtl@gmail.com, telephone 01670 632 460 or 0791 666 4174. Just £30 per person deposit. Thanks to Media Arts for all the help with the technical side of things. And if you like listening to us as a podcast, you can go to Sports Social Podcast Network or to iTunes, Spotify, or other podcast providers. If you want to support the show, then hit the subscribe button. It's free. We do 7 shows a week. Hit the little thumb up under the video, which is the like button, or click share to share to your social media. You can also join the channel on YouTube by hitting the join button for as little as $1.99 a month. If you want to become an NUFC Matters member, you can go to nufcmatters.co.uk. It's a £25 one-off fee. You get your pen, you get your badge, a key ring, you get your beer mat and your fridge magnet and your membership card, nufcmatters.co.uk for that. And we have an event early next year, 13th of February 2026, an evening with Beardsley, Waddle and Gascoigne takes place at the Tyne Theatre and Opera House. To buy your tickets for that event, go to the box office 0191 243 1171 or Tyne Theatre and Opera House.uk.